you might wonder why something called UTMC is in this session, which is all policy kind of focused. I'll talk to the microphone. I have to stand still now, don't I? That's boring. All right. I shall try to enlighten you. This is what UTMC was created to be. It was supposed to be something which helped systems be glued together for practical purposes to do things which individual systems working together couldn't do by themselves, and to do so in an efficient and consistent and effective way. Started in the mid-1990s ish, and consolidated its views on these kind of areas: standards, guidance, engagement with the sector, and the ability to evolve from and to. And at various points over the course of the past 30 years, has been tested against those visions, if you like. And everything that has happened says, yes, we absolutely need those things. We need to be able to do those gluings, otherwise we're not getting the integration benefits that are in principle possible. We had a big hiatus between about 2010 and about 2020, when there was lots of post-global financial crisis austerity. Nobody quite knew where they were going with funding. DFT certainly didn't, and so we didn't. But we did get brought back into the TTF fold. Thank you very much to the team here and to Elk Creek for having us back a few years ago. And since then, we've been working with our new steering group to try to rewrite, if you like, what those visionary aspects mean in the 2020s. And that's taken us on a journey which we perhaps weren't quite expecting to do, but has been very valuable. So this is the diagram we came up with, and I think we showed this last time. I could be wrong. We had a glue diagram for UTMC old, and it was all about linking together specific bits of technology. So you'd link your VMS and your UTC and your car park monitoring signs and all these various things. And it was all about technology standards and data exchanges and all that kind of stuff. What we have now is a very, very different picture. Well, it's a very similar picture, but it's linking very different things and for different purposes. And what's become clear to us over the course of the past few years, working with the new steering group and talking with our colleagues around, is that we need to change the level at which we're operating. And this ought not to come to a surprise, because this has always happened. Even if you're a core software engineer, you don't really care how your silicon is refined or converted into wafers or something. The chips just happen and they get glued into boxes and you use it in the way that you do. When we started the UTMC journey, we didn't quite start at silicon, but we did start not that far above it, and we had to start talking about communication protocols. And at the time, we said, this internet thing of which we're hearing, that sounds quite useful potentially. And I look back and we spent a number of years basically saying to the community, can we maybe use the internet protocol for communicating things? And it was a surprising push at that point. We had to put quite a lot of effort into doing those things. Industry relatively quickly said, yeah, actually it looks all right, and picked it up. So that by the time the UTMC research program proper, that finished in about 2003 or 4, came to its close, the bulk of the supply industry was now using internet protocol things. So that's good. So what's next? So then we move up into the data domain. How are you structuring the data that's shifting around between systems? And that's still a challenge. So a lot of the what we have in UTMC at the moment is about data structures and the mechanisms by which data structures can be understood, and so on. Now, this is a bit where I get embarrassed because we've had over the past few minutes much chuckling about how old it is, the guidance, and goodness me, that was 15 years ago. Well, the last time that UTMC had a technical refresh was about 15 years ago. And yet, it's still in live deployment, in live operation around the country. But it's not being developed in that way. And part of the reason it's not being developed in that way is because the environment in which specifications and standards are developed is completely different now from what they were then. When UTMC was originally conceived, there wasn't anything much to go on. There were a few bits and pieces. So we basically had to, through the good offices of the industry at the time, create the specifications and standards that we needed. Well, that's no longer the case. There are scads of standards out there, more standards than you can actually use. So that's all tasks that we no longer really need to do. And there are institutions that deal with those standards, and there are many bodies that are better at understanding all the various standards than we could possibly be ourselves. But what I am a big fan of is bringing things together. And there is some bringing things together there that's still necessary. We still operate in a world where highways and traffic and public transport and air quality are functions that don't talk to each other. And that's not because the silicon can't do it or even because the data can't do it. It's because the humanware systems that acquire and integrate the technologies and then use them to do things don't link together so well. So what we have here is a glue between entities and functions, for the want of a better word, that says, how do we make these things work together? That's what we're now aiming for. So where we are now is this old UTMC, the specifications and standards that we developed in the period up to about 2010, a couple of bits after that, is still relevant and necessary. It still applies to much of what's out there, sometimes with tweaks, often with tweaks. There's still plenty of improvement that can happen there, but we no longer really feel the need to control that, especially as we now have Topaz in a position to do the kinds of things that we were doing then much better than we could. So, as I think Steve told you yesterday, the UTMC technical specification has now formally been handed over to Topaz for their control and maintenance. And if we haven't actually repointed the UTMC website to that, it will be done very shortly. That's where you need to be going for those standards, and they will be doing whatever improvements and updates and additions are necessary at that level. That means that the governance that we structured around those, the UDG and its supplier members and its local authority members and its governmental members, that structure has served its purpose because we don't have the function to create these specifications and standards as our role anymore. What we do have is a new layer to jump to. And that's where the link to Manual for Smart Streets comes in. Manual for Smart Streets is, unless I've got it completely wrong, designedly technology neutral. Yeah? It's all about taking the objectives of the department and conveying them through possible functions that might support those objectives. But it doesn't say anything much about how specifically you might consider deploying that function. So how do you do that? Well, there are systems out there, and of course you can talk to your suppliers and other suppliers and do your own research on how to link these things together. But then that's another way in which patchworks can emerge and inconsistencies of approach can emerge and inefficiencies can emerge. Doesn't mean everybody has to do things the same way, but if there are good practices, then perhaps we should be sharing them. And that applies at operational level and at technology level. So while we don't need to create the standards, we might well need to filter them and to identify which ones are relevant in which circumstances to do which things. And sometimes you can imagine this getting quite carefully finessed. And discussion we had earlier in the margins highlighted a few areas, and I'm not going to repeat that now because you'll have to wait. Highlighted a few areas in which that's the case, where there are things which are anecdotally true around the community, that actually this particular approach will only work in certain circumstances on the roads, but nobody's actually captured that anywhere or worked out exactly how to determine whether those circumstances apply to that junction or this corridor. Well, maybe there's a role for that to happen. And if the information hasn't been properly researched, which is possible, then maybe that's a prompt to do some proper research. So that's the point that we will attempt to step into. We'll provide the resource that ties together those here's some good things to do advice from Manual for Smart Streets to the here's the best guidance on how to do it, that the tools and the techniques can work. Now, where this goes is not clear. Yeah, there's evolutionary possibilities for this around. Paula mentioned AI just now. AI is not a departmental objective. AI is just a technology, but that doesn't mean the department isn't interested in the deployment of AI. So is there a need somewhere in here to have, if you are considering AI as a user, what might you do with it, and how might your AI systems be linked up that do these various functions to do additional things? I don't know whether that's a meaningful thing or not yet. That's certainly something which other people need to do work for first. And that applies to the whole of this diagram. The thing that was sitting on my head over the past 6 months or so is, golly, this is an awful lot of work. But the thing is that we don't need to do that. In fact, we shouldn't be doing that. All the interesting stuff will be happening, I don't know whether this pointer is working, but will be happening around the edges. All we will be trying to do is to saying to the people are in those boxes, we're looking for best practice in this function. What do you got? Distilling that and then feeding back what that is into a context which looks at the Manual for Smart Streets functions, maybe reflects back to them, yeah, but have you considered these aspects? So you're talking about buses, but have you considered connectivity requirements? Have you considered air quality requirements in the way you're doing things? The pilot we have in mind for this, which is there, and I think, again, Steve may have mentioned this yesterday, is in public transport. We have been working together with ARTIG, which is, of course, public transport specialist group, on bus priority over the course of the past couple of years to identify what the issues are, what the current state of play is with specifications and standards, how people are thinking about it in the future, and so on. That's a neat box that can be brought into this as an early stage. Other functions will emerge. We don't know how to prioritize those yet. What's the likely pace of bringing them in? That's something that we're going to be trying to work out over the course of the next few months. What should be next after that, and so on. So, in order to do that, we need to position ourselves correctly within the institutional space. And that means that rather than having this separate traffic management focused group of local authorities and suppliers that think about where the standards and specifications are needed, this is a much more holistic position that links much more closely with the department and its branches, the TTF community as a whole. And that's where we think we will be directly reporting to. Again, the details on that to be determined, but that's the aim. I think that's it. So wish us well.